Lauren Branning's Jacqueline Jassa world is set to implode in EastEnders, and it's all thanks for Mark Fowler Jr. Stephen Aaron Sipple, who has sabotaged her efforts to prove herself to Dad Max, Jake Wood. The car dealer, as viewers know, has been on a mission to show Max, who bought the car lot she had her heart set on earlier in the year, that she's got what it takes to run the business with him. Max decided to put her confidence to the test, setting her the goal of selling £80,000 worth of motors. If she wins, he'll give her half of his business. Lauren is determined to succeed, working alongside Mark, who has been fixing up old cars which she then sells. Her efforts have proven fruitful thus far, and she's confident that she'll win the bet. So much so that Max has been left on edge. But on the advice of Sam Mitchell, Kim Metcalf, Mark has taken drastic action in order to raise the money he needs to pay off gangster Russell Delaney, who doubled his debt earlier this week. Sam reminded Mark that he'd make a lot more money doing up and selling dodgy motors as opposed to legit ones. Mark reiterated that Lauren wants to do things above board, but Sam was quick to point out that if the legit motors vanish from the face of the earth, then Lauren will have no choice but to get on board with the dodgy ones. That is, if she wants to win her bet and secure her stake in the car lot. After giving it some thought, Mark decided to do what Sam suggested, and in dark scenes towards the end of Thursday's, May 14th, edition of the BBC One soap, Mark and Sam emerged from the shadows in a remote location and set fire to the vehicle he'd spent the previous night fixing up for Lauren to sell on. Lauren had already secured a buyer for the motor in question, so Mark's actions will leave her devastated. Will Mark's plan to get Lauren on board with selling dodgy cars work? And if so, will he raise the money he needs to get Russell Delaney off his back once and for all? And even if he does, if he and Lauren do start doing up and selling on dodgy motors, will this come back to bite them? Let's also not forget that theory that's been going around ever since the Flash Forward episode, with fans convinced that Lauren and Mark will be having an affair by New Year's Day 2027. Will their potential success in dodgy dealings ultimately see this theory come to pass? The smell of smoke still clung to Albert Square long after the flames had been extinguished. Black soot stained the walls of the cafe, shattered glass covered the pavement, and the flashing blue lights from the fire engines reflected in every horrified face standing in the street. Nobody in Walford had slept. The arson attack had ripped through the square in the dead of night, turning an ordinary evening into pure chaos. Families had been dragged from their homes, terrified residents screamed for help, and one devastating question now hung over everyone. Who started the fire? At the center of the destruction stood Kathy's cafe, or what remained of it. The windows were gone, tables reduced to charred splinters, and the familiar warmth of the place had vanished beneath smoke and ash. For years, the cafe had been the heart of the community. Now it looked like a war zone. Kathy Beale stood frozen behind the police tape, unable to speak. Beside her, Ian stared blankly at the ruins, struggling to process what had happened. "It's all gone," Kathy whispered. Ian clenched his jaw. Someone did this on purpose. The police had already confirmed accelerants were found inside the building. This wasn't an accident. Someone wanted destruction, and they had succeeded. As news spread across Walford, panic quickly turned into suspicion. Neighbors began eyeing each other differently. Old feuds suddenly mattered again. Secrets resurfaced. And before long, accusations were flying across the square. Phil Mitchell arrived at the scene with fury written all over his face. He demanded answers from the police before turning his attention toward the growing crowd. "Whoever done this," Phil growled, "they better pray I don't find him first." Sharon watched silently from nearby, but her attention wasn't on the cafe. It was on a nervous-looking teenager standing near the arches. Oscar Branning. The young troublemaker looked pale as death. His hands trembled as sirens echoed through the square. Sharon noticed immediately. "You all right?" she asked carefully. Oscar forced a shrug. "Why wouldn't I be?" But Sharon wasn't convinced. Meanwhile, inside the Queen Vic, Linda Carter struggled to hold things together as frightened residents gathered for shelter and answers. Tensions exploded almost instantly. "This ain't random," Ravi declared loudly. "Someone here knows more than they're saying." That single sentence changed everything. Eyes turned across the pub. Nobody trusted anybody anymore. Then came the real shock. Jack Branning entered with police officers behind him and announced they had recovered CCTV footage from nearby businesses. The footage showed a hooded figure entering the cafe moments before the fire began. But there was one detail nobody expected. The suspect appeared injured, limping badly. Suddenly all attention shifted toward Nigel Bates, who had arrived earlier that morning with burns on his arm. "You think it was me?" Nigel snapped angrily as whispers spread through the pub. "I tried helping people." But doubt had already poisoned the room. Even Phil narrowed his eyes. "You've got some explaining to do." Nigel stormed out before anyone could stop him. Outside, rain began pouring over the square as tensions reached breaking point. Denise Fox confronted Jack over the investigation, furious that innocent people were already being targeted. "You're turning neighbors against each other," Denise shouted. Jack looked exhausted. "People could have died, Denise." And that was the terrifying truth. One person nearly had. Hidden from most residents, Lauren Branning sat inside the hospital beside Peter Beale's bed. Peter had suffered smoke inhalation after rushing back into the burning cafe to save a trapped customer. Doctors warned his condition could worsen. Lauren held his hand tightly, tears filling her eyes. "You idiot," she whispered emotionally. "You could have died." Peter managed a weak smile. Couldn't let someone burn alive. But Lauren's relief quickly turned to fear when a nurse entered with devastating news. The trapped customer Peter rescued had gone missing from the hospital. Nobody knew where they were. Back in Walford, Sharon finally confronted Oscar privately after noticing his increasingly erratic behavior. "You know something," she said firmly. Oscar avoided eye contact. "I don't. Don't lie to me." The teenager finally cracked. Earlier that night, Oscar had seen someone near the cafe carrying a petrol can. At first he thought it was just rubbish being dumped illegally, but then he recognized the person. His face drained with fear as he revealed the name. Harry Mitchell. Sharon was stunned. Harry had spent weeks spiraling out of control, battling debt, anger issues, and humiliation after recent events in the square. But arson? That changed everything. "What exactly did you see?" Sharon asked urgently. Before Oscar could answer, a loud crash echoed outside. The windows of the Queen Vic suddenly exploded inward as a brick came flying through the glass. Customers screamed. Linda ducked behind the bar while Phil charged outside in fury. Scrawled across the brick was a chilling message. "This is only the beginning." Panic spread instantly. This wasn't over. Whoever started the fire wanted the square terrified. And it was working. Later that evening, Jack gathered several residents in the community center for an emergency meeting. But before he could speak, the electricity suddenly cut out. Darkness swallowed the room. People panicked immediately. Then came another horrifying sound. A fire alarm. Screams erupted as smoke began pouring beneath the doors. Residents scrambled desperately for exits while Jack shouted for calm. In the confusion, someone shoved Cindy Beale violently to the floor. By the time the lights returned seconds later, the smoke had vanished. It had been a setup, a sick game, and one person was missing. Oscar. Outside in the pouring rain, Sharon discovered him trembling behind the laundrette. He looked terrified beyond words. "He knows I saw him," Oscar whispered. "Who does?" Before Oscar could answer, headlights suddenly illuminated the alleyway. A black car sped toward them at terrifying speed. Sharon shoved Oscar out of the way just in time as the vehicle screeched past, smashing into bins before disappearing into the night. The square had fallen into complete chaos. An arson attack had become something far more dangerous. Now someone was trying to silence witnesses. And as Walford descended deeper into fear, one thing became terrifyingly clear. The fire was only the beginning. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to EastEnders Spoilers Official.